First of all, Lateefah, thank you for making the time. So excited to have this conversation. I feel like we could do a series together. It would just be, fun to wrap. But I got to ask a really important question right off the jump. We're
Mhm.
collecting secret hobbies. I wanted to
Yes.
know about something you absolutely love doing outside of work that your colleagues would not expect.
It's not a hobby, but I am well, I guess it is a hobby because I was going to say it's habitual, declutterer,
Hmm.
like habitual. Like it is a problem where, and it started really in childhood where my mother would say, "Where's my Al Green record?" And I'm like, "Well, it shouldn't have been laid out if you wanted it. Like I threw it away." It's like, I've always been of a very minimalist person. So with children, even just with the life that I've led and all the interesting stuff, I I declutter, but I try to save important things. But I realize that in this effect to kind of like always have a very clean house and all this stuff that I lose a lot of memories. But I'm a what is the book of the sister of like the art of being tidy or whatever. I should have came out years and years ago with my own.
I
Yeah,
might
bring.
remember this when we get together next time. I'm going to put like two pieces of paper on the table and see what happens. You start
Oh
arranging.
yeah. Oh goodness, it'll drive me crazy.
So you know the moment we're in, and I just want to get into some questions about that. How does your organization address the stark need to address racial inequities in our communities? And what has this moment revealed for you guys and how you do business?
I came to the Akonadi Foundation, after just so many years of admiration. The Akonadi Foundation was one of the first funders of the Young Women's Freedom Center after I took over as executive director. And there were a lot of folks who were a little bit nervous because I hadn't finished school. I was a young mother at the time I took over. I was in a below market rate apartment, hadn't just left public housing, and Quinn Delaney and Wayne Jordan took a big um, bet on me and others. There was a lot of other young executive directors um, who were doing movement work in the 90s, and there was not a clear vision of how philanthropy understood what we were doing, but we were pretty coordinated and we were tackling police violence and again the juvenile justice system and ending mass incarceration. um, and for me, I now understand sometimes it takes 20 years, for 30 years, for a generation, for philanthropy, the corporate sector, larger dominant culture to understand how people are moving on the ground and what they're looking to change. And so to be in this moment and to have this privilege to work at Akonadi, knowing that we have been supporting institutions, um, both venerable and extremely grassroots and uh, close to the ground for years. Understanding and acknowledging is like people don't get free because systems say you're free or you have this opportunity. That communities are, it's incumbent upon real folk and real communities with real small and large institutions to create that pathway. So, the Akonadi Foundation now, what the work that we're doing is we've been pretty clear working with our allies, other funders and researchers and activists and organizers, that we can use our resources as a very sort of mid-sized, some would say small family foundation to support really the 20 years of work we've been doing in Oakland, and that is to end criminalization in our school system and to end the criminalization of Black and Brown children in our juvenile justice or incarceral system. And that we have been funding many efforts over the years, but now it's time to go all in.
Mhm.
And so going all in for us, and again, our grant making is called All In for Oakland. We've kind of developed a theme for it. Is going all in is supporting grassroots groups, but ensuring these grassroots groups who are working on campaigns are coordinated, that we're funding their data, we're funding their communications, we're funding their legal, and we're funding all the myriad of supports that base building groups need to fight and to win. Again, in collaboration with other funders, we're one of many, but it's about funding and supporting and trusting this brilliance of folks, and also pushing them to be able to articulate and feel okay with saying, we actually don't do that. We can't do that, but if you give me the resource, I can get someone to do it.
Mhm.
Um, So I think it's amazing to be in this moment, being in a foundation that said, from 20, almost 21 years ago, we support racial justice leadership and movement building. So I'm at the right place.
Well, what you're really talking about, though, is building power for communities at the forefront of the movement,
That's right.
namely Black and Indigenous communities.
That's right.
For foundations who are catching up to that reality or that approach, are you seeing evidence that folks are starting to take the right steps? And if so, why? Or if not, why not?
Yes. So there are new funds that are being developed. I'm helping to develop one of them, the California Black Freedom Fund. The corporations and individual donors, everyone that I am in community with in many ways in philanthropy has said we have to do something. We actually did say this at the beginning of Ferguson as well as a sector, and then we retreated. Okay. Things felt like they calmed down. There wasn't Black and Indigenous people in the news every day in terms of movement building, although they were doing work in communities. And so funders started to drift off and think about other things. I think this moment requires us to look at what we've learned this year, um, as you know, the mainstream media, but also very courageous leaders on the ground have told us, even if you retreat, we have and been working. And we will continue to work. We will
Mhm.
continue to push our mayors, our police chiefs, our director of public health, our directors of our elected folks who are doing work around mobility and transportation. There is a vibrant ecosystem of folks on the ground working to ensure that Black life is celebrated, not just sort of tolerated.
Mhm.
And it's been there. And I think where we need to, and where I'm really interested in, and I've been telling a number of my mentors and scholars that I know, um, help me and help our foundation, help me understand how philanthropy can sabotage liberation movements. We've seen it before, how we can be complicit in the splintering of deep solidarity. We've seen it in the civil rights movement, when it was actually the family philanthropies that were pretty clear that they wanted LDF to just focus on DSEG, and which is important. But the lawyers of our movement had a huge liberation strategy, but they could get funded to do litigation, right? And I am thankful for the unpaid workers who continued, sort of, whether they had been in academia and the HBCUs and the activists who were on the streets, and many of the foremothers and fathers. I just talked to Elaine Brown today, the second chairman of the Black Panther Party, who decided to just do the work for free,
Mhm.
because it could not be reliant on good white people or money that would suppress and sort of limit what we all know we deserve: access, right? Just to be treated fairly by the state, to be able to have the things in our communities that prevent, fratricide, like jobs and really good schools and trained teachers. So I think as a field, we'll come into understanding that the crisis of COVID is not going away. The crisis of racial inequity and the savagery of white supremacy, it unfortunately has been very, very calculated and clear. That what do we do to be of least harm and not most harm? Because when you have resources and you deny some and you give to others, there's harm there. But how can we learn from how philanthropy has been most helpful in the struggles for freedom in this country, and how can we stop and cease the activities that have prevented that?
I'm curious, what do you think the principal barrier is for more foundations not having that approach to this moment or to racial equity work, or what prevents more of us from stepping in with that kind of humility?
I think there must be great acknowledgement about the regional sins of this country,
Mhm.
right? You just have to acknowledge it, and it's all around us. Um, I think that it is easier for people to talk about equity than justice. It's easy, to put a band-aid on something, because that's kind of like what we were all trained in professionally, but also just as people, as children, as young, to stop the bleeding. instead of diagnosing and figuring out a collaborative way. We see doctors do it all the time with cancer and terminal illnesses. Folks try to get together to figure out where are all the points in which there's harm happening in the body. I wish we would think that way about cities and regions in the
Mhm.
nation. Like how do we actually rid ourselves of these cancers that keep people poor, that keep people sick, that keep people maligned. um, Racism is difficult to talk about at people's family and at Thanksgiving, much less in the workplace. And I think that there must be courageous, not just people of color, who are not responsible alone for undoing racism. Black people in this moment are like the ones who are supposed to undo capitalism. That's ridiculous. Or undo the horrors of homicides in communities, or undo homelessness. I don't understand that. Like, that's not the way that this works. Like, we actually we have an obligation in philanthropy to work with all of the stakeholders and the myriad of ecosystems that we work in, and to get it right. But when you don't want to acknowledge the fact that in many of our organizations, the only person that you have of color, the only single mother, is your assistant, or the person who comes to clean while you're working late, or the fact that you will only take people from the top 10 Ivy schools, the racism and classism that is embedded in this system. There is no accountability marker. Very few folks push up against folks who have access to resources unless you're in government. We actually have to turn ourselves in and out. And I think that that's why the conversations that you're having are so important. And we all are to blame. This year, Akonadi, we committed ourselves to deeply understanding anti-Blackness. And I had to say, as a Black person, I experience anti-Blackness all the time, and I don't know and understand how to undo it, not just in non-Black people, but in my own leadership. And so I'm not going to purport that I have the curriculum, or that there's some easy way out, or there's a consultant that we're going to hire to challenge like the deep, profound sort of racist ideas that live in all of us. This has to be, and it will be, an organizational value of like being a learning institution. I realize we've been talking race for years, and again, racial justice organization, but how can I turn up the conversation and
Well,
turn up our learning?
and that really makes me wonder where are the edges? You're working, you're leading a progressive foundation, but still you're running into challenges. What kind of things put your team at its edge?
This year in Oakland, we have some beautiful groups who are challenging so much of what we understand have been deep oppressive forces, right? Like, having armed police around second graders, right? When, our white counterparts would never want that. Um, and we fund advocacy and organizing. But during COVID, right at the beginning, when our wonderful board said, let's take $1 million out of the endowment and develop a fund to begin addressing some of the underpinnings of what's going to emerge based on rapid job loss, lack of mobility, lack of healthcare opportunities, not just with COVID, but all of the other things that are happening. Our focus is to win campaigns. But when we started reaching out to groups that we did not fund and understanding really the connections, the service institutions directly impact the ability for groups to organize well, right?
Right.
The child care centers are essential for movement building, right? Not just for the protests, but for the mothers who are members of organizations to be able to drop off their kids while they go to community college and then they come to the meeting later. Our organizations are just so connected to real life and real people and East and West Oakland, and the realities of eviction. We cannot bifurcate both the plight and the promise of our people, but also the deprivation that this moment, but also historically, has been there to access to services and access to culture and access really to togetherness. So it is the humbling of ourselves to be like, wow, I didn't even know this organization, this person, this healer existed. And they're deep in East Oakland, and this woman is sitting on her porch every single day, and she is a case manager, an organizer, a warrior times 20,000. And
Well,
why
and there's
doesn't
an
she
irony,
have
right?
resources, right? Right?
There's an irony too, because we just spent a generation or half our careers trying to convince philanthropy to invest in systems change, right? And that
Yes.
service alone was not enough. And so
Yes.
then you come full circle with us. We have to have both parts of that equation for this work to happen. So,
That people live full lives, that people live full lives. And again, Black Panthers knew it. It's like, the most revolutionary thing that you can do is feed babies in the morning, right? You could make so that mom knows that her kid is okay, and that at school the kid is going to be okay. There's the boys club for many mothers, including myself. When my firstborn was young, it was $10 a year to know that I could do the work that I was doing and send her to a place where she was going to be loved on. That made me a better movement leader as a young person. So I think this moment for us is like, what is the epistemology that has sworn us to this thinking that we don't have to go deeper? We should always be thinking deeper, going deeper, challenging ourselves, meeting folks. We can't say no to everybody, but we sure can be a big ear. And
so
then we can evangelize to our other partners who do fund that work. But in order to be good evangelists for justice and good community work, we got to be close.
so if you were going to give a piece of advice to a colleague, a foundation CEO colleague who in this year realized I need to do more. I want to transform my organization, but we haven't had this conversation, certainly not this robustly before. What would be I won't say the piece of advice, but a piece of advice you'd give them about where to start?
There's a couple of things. I think that, oh, I'll just actually say one. I'll say one, the one that I'm feeling so much. And many of our grant applications, we have a section that talks about collaboration, right? We actually ask our groups to be very clear about who they're working with and why. And um, we we kind of litigate who those leaders are, those other organizations, and we make a justification of, well, this is a good coalition. This is a good group of people. I think now is an opportunity for us to do the same, right? And why I'm so excited about you and NCG is, how can philanthropy really work together? Not just to give money, but to not just to coordinate funding, but to really be a force in thinking about how we can do the most good, beyond this idea of altruism.
Mhm.
And in cities across Northern California, there are services that are no longer going to get funded because for the next couple of years because of sales tax lack of revenue. We have holes to fill now, and we also have aspirational sort of dreams to fund. And we better do the least of what we ask our grantees to do is to be talking to each other, to be mapping our resources, but also not only that, understanding that it is a drop in the bucket, and for our community foundations and our C4s to be really helping our organizations that we fund shake the trees and plan ahead with government officials, with our local, county, and state folks to make sure that they're not forgotten.
I have what hopefully will be an easy question, but often I find for folks who are deep in movement, what do you do for your own self care? What brings you joy?
So it's okay. I do two things. I was born and raised in San Francisco, so a lot of my good friends are, when they're not in philanthropy, okay, and they're not in government or they're not in policy. So I do a lot of like girlfriend chatter throughout the day, text message. My girlfriends will say, "I saw you on the news, and we need to get you a stylist." Like there's also all kind of banter. I'm like, I know I haven't gotten it together yet after all these years. So I have really beautiful girlfriend relationships that are really honest and true. The other thing that I do, um, I So I've been a mom my whole adult life, right? I had my kid, I was pregnant at 18, had my baby at 19. My daughter, my oldest is coming home from law school, her first semester at Howard. And then I have a 9-year-old and I'm a single mom, I'm a widow. My husband passed away 7 years ago. I love my kids and I love to dance and I didn't have my 20s to like be at university and do all this stuff. So I have a very kind of with my kids a young spirit. We dance a lot. We do TikToks, a lot of Patti LaBelle, singing in my house.
I want editors know, I want folks to know we will be sure to splice in some of the juiciest TikToks we can find.
I'm gonna. We'll do some new ones tonight. Okay,
Okay.
so I'm just. I want to be. You know, I want to live in joy, and I want folks that I've worked for over the years, these young people and these young folks behind bars, to know that, this, the work that I'm doing, it is in complete service of them and try to live the life that I know that they deserve, right? A life of joy, a life of clarity, a life of friends and family and culture and politics. So I'm really pushing myself to not only with self-care. Self-care to me is like it's holistic, but
Mhm.
joy is in the center of that.
Excellent. And the most powerful tool we have to combat inequity, to combat hate, is love.
That's
And it
right.
starts with love of self. So I'm so glad to hear you have the tools. So grateful that you have dedicated your entire adult life to this work and to have witnessed and occasionally taken part within the journey, and looking forward to keep at it in the years to come. So deep thanks for the time and looking forward to what comes next.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I love you so much. I'm so happy you're with NCG. It's like one of my favorite organizations ever. And we're going to do so much cool stuff.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Bye.